teacher is Yehudit Werchow, and I will introduce Yehudit in a few minutes. To begin, we have some technical information for everybody. Adam?
The webinar broadcast has begun with all attendees in listen-only mode. Before the presentation begins, we would like to review a few guidelines for webinar attendees. You should all see a panel in your window similar to our example at the right. This control panel presents each attendee with various options related to our webinar presentation. Please familiarize yourself with this panel so you have an optimal webinar experience. If the panel is getting in your way, you can click on the double arrows to minimize the panel and better view the presentation. You can disregard the hand icon. We will not be using that function during this presentation. Should you have any questions or you would like to participate, should the presenter prompt a response, you can type your responses and questions in the questions log. You have the option of choosing one of two audio modes, use telephone or use mic and speakers. Please select the mode that works for you, but also be aware that most computers do not have a built-in microphone, so selecting the telephone for your audio mode is often the best bet. When using the telephone component, be sure to enter your audio PIN, which is displayed in the audio pane. If you are encountering any technical issues with your webinar experience, please type your questions into the questions log and I will do my best to assist you. If you continue to have difficulty with any portion of the webinar, please contact GoToWebinar Help either by calling their helpline and selecting option 1 or by clicking on the Help option on top of your webinar panel and selecting GoToWebinar Help. Thank you for your attention and patience, and let's begin our presentation.
Our teacher today is Yehudit Werchow, who is our central shlicha for the Union for Reform Judaism. In addition, Yehudit is a fourth-year rabbinic student in our Israel Rabbinic program. I hope you will enjoy the presentation and will learn from Yehudit's selection of text. Yehudit, you're on.
Thank you, John. אז קודם כל, shalom. Hello, everyone. As John just read, the title of our webinar is Each Person Has a Name. לכל איש יש שם. This title is borrowed from Zelda's renowned poem, and the poem explores the complex and rich dynamics between a person, his or her personality, and the name each of us holds. Our portion for this week is Parashat, portion Vayishlach, and it covers many themes and dramas. We will focus during our study on the story of Jacob, the meaning of his name, the connection between his name and his action, and in other words, how his name affects his action and how these actions shape his life story. As we will see, the connection and interactions between the individual's identity and his or her name have puzzled and inspired our sages and writers. So our written tradition from ancient to modern Israeli poetry is rich in proverbs, stories, and thoughts on this theme. We will explore together today and study a few of these texts, and I hope that our study will enrich our knowledge about our tradition, but also inspire our own personal stories, because as I found, each of us has our own connection and story and journey with our own names. So I invite us to start with our first text. John, would you like to move us to the second slide? Good. And we will read, all the text in this presentation are both in Hebrew and in English. Most of them will read only in English. Some of them, mainly the poems, will read in both languages. And throughout the presentation, if you have questions or comments, please, you can type them and we will address them. John, can you start by reading the first English one?
We find that people are called by three names. One is what their parents call them. One is what they are called by others. And one is what they create for themselves. The best of all is the one they create or acquire for themselves? From Midrash Tanhuma.
Thank you. So this is actually an interesting, towards the end of the presentation, we will go to the poem that I mentioned, Zelda's poem, Each Person Has a Name. And the interesting first thing to know about the poem that there is a connection or a conversation between this passage from Tanhuma and the poem itself. And the text from Tanhuma creates a distinction between the relationship between a name and a person, and divides it into three parts, as we can see. First part is the name that is given to each individual by his father and his mother. The second one has to do with the social interaction and the relationship between each individual and friends. And the third one has to do with the individual and his own meaning. So my first question to us is, how do you understand the second part? What does it mean that the best one is the one they create or we create or acquire for ourselves? What is the difference between the first two names that each of us is given and the third name?
Please feel free to write in your answers to that in the question log, and I will read them.
Sure.
Yes.
So I was suspecting that the silence might have to do something with that. My question was, the third part of the text from Tanhuma says the best one is the one they create for themselves. So my question is, how do you understand that third part? Why is it best, and what does it mean, the one that we create for ourselves? Is it clear now?
Okay, here's one comment from, so I can see whose it is. I need to make this bigger. A name one picks for oneself is one that shows one's understanding of our own nature, strengths, etc. The one we acquire for ourselves is based on building our identity, learning who we are. Can be a literal name or perhaps a reputation. It is the most authentic.
Right. So do we have another one there?
I don't know. I think I got everybody.
Okay. So as we can see, there is the main distinction is between passive and active. The first two ones are given to us. There is a passive element in the individual. The second one has to do with our own exploration, trying to discover who we are. Reputation has to do with action. So there is a second, the element that is most dominant in the second part is being active. We receive, we acquire, and we create. And the reason why I added acquire and create has to do with some of the comments that you've been giving, because first of all, the emphasis is on being active or being proactive. The first two ones are given to us. The third one has to do with our interaction with the world and with ourselves. One of the last comments was about authenticity. And that's a big question that is linked to the relationship between a man or a woman and their name, because if we bear into account the fact that the name is given to us in early stages where we didn't really have yet the possibility to really shape it or shape our personality, what we'll see today is how that affects our journeys and what's the interaction between the journeys and our growing understanding of who we are and who we want to be, and what our actions are, and how that nurtures back our name. Yes.
Yehudit, before we move on, there are a few more comments.
Sure. So let's hear them.
Often name us before they know us. So it is about their hopes and aspirations for us. The name called by others is based on appearance. The one we create is personal to us.
Wonderful. So
a name we acquire by our relationship with others. It shows what we think of ourselves. My parents named me Miriam in English, but my Hebrew name is Mara. It turned out to be prophetic, as I've spent most of my adult life as an educator. Mara is certainly the name I would have chosen for myself. My parents did not, and it continues, my parents did not push me to become an educator. And I think that covers all of the comments so far.
Wonderful. First of all, thank you. I think that nearly every comment will get back to it as we develop, as we continue with the text, because they all address exactly that tension. Being given a name by others also has to do with expectations that our parents, our family, our peers have from us. Sometimes we address these expectations, sometimes we run away from these expectations. So there isn't always positive link between an individual and his name. Sometimes people change the name. I want to address one word, or draw our attention to the word. In Hebrew it says, "Ve'echad ma shekoneh hu le'atzmo." Koneh we translates into create or acquire. Two other passages in Genesis where the verb kana, to acquire, appears are also linked to creation and also to giving a name. The first one is from Genesis 14, when it describes the creation of heaven and earth, and it says God created heaven and earth. So the first thing is to look at kana as create. And some of you have said, you know, we chose the name, we shaped the name by our actions and also by our own aspirations. The second one has to do with Eve. When she gives birth to Cain, she names him Cain because she mentions that unlike Adam and Eve that has been created by God, Cain is the first creation. It's a first partnership in creation because it has to do with a partnership between Eve, Adam, and God. And I think that the interesting game here is that on one hand we see that giving a name to oneself has to do with creating a personality, like some of you have already shared with us, and the other side is a partnership with God. Many of the names, biblical names, but Hebrew names in general, reflect in them some kind of a relationship with God. When we add a certain syllable representing the presence or the relationship or the partnership between man and God, and also there are some names like Hosha, he was saved, or Yehoshua, names that there is an explicit remark of the presence of God. As we will see with Jacob, one of the questions will be what happens to Jacob, the transition in his name, and what is the relationship or the link between the transition in names and the relationship with God. So before we move to our next text, I just want to allow questions if we have, or comments. I think we're ready to move, right? Okay. And as I said, before we move, there is one more thing that before we continue, I want to say that in the last text, there was a clear distinction between a normative distinction. The first two names that were given are good. but the best one is the one that we create for ourselves. And that tension between accepting a name that was given to us and creating our own name, whether it's the literal name or a reputation, that's going to be an ongoing theme in our study of Parashat Vaishlach. So those of us who have been following the weekly portions have already been following Jacob, and I feel that most of us probably get a sense of the bumpy journey that awaited for him and that he's going through. We will go back to the first moment when we're introduced to Jacob, and that comes from Genesis 25, as we will see and hear in a second. John?
There's a question here.
Sure.
Which goes back to what you just said. So when people are named in English with L, E-L, Ellen, is the partnership with God being imposed on the person even if the person doing the naming wasn't aware of the significance of the L attached to the name?
It's a wonderful question, first of all, and on two levels. First of all, I want to understand that I understood. I want to just make sure that I understood the question. The question is, even when the name is given in English and there is an L element to it, if that means that there is some kind of presence of God in the name, that's the question?
Yes, I think so.
Okay. And the second part was how it affects the individual, even if the individual doesn't want to have that element. So on the second one, it's an interesting question, and also it represents a struggle. Many people do struggle with the name because having a God, an element or a presence of God in the name also represent the expectations of the people that name that person, of their Jewish journey maybe in the future, or of the amount of the Jewish identity that that person is expected to have. I personally don't think, and that's what I will try to argue in this presentation, that unless we identify with the meaning of the name or with some part of the meaning of the name then remains as a title. We always have the possibility, and I will maybe conclude with my personal story of my name, we always have the possibility of engaging in a positive way with the meaning in of our name, and especially when it comes to adding an element of God. Sometimes, by the way, adding the element of God is because either before the birth, during the pregnancy, or in the close or distant family, there was some kind of a challenge, and when that person is being born, the attributing the presence of God into his name also is a way of praying and hoping for the good health in spirit and body of that person. So sometimes it's a blessing. It doesn't necessarily, though, mean that we need to accept it or to fully identify with that.
Okay. There are a couple more comments.
Sure.
Much like what happened to Adam to exist in the Garden of Eden as God's creation, and then to exist outside the garden and make his own life, his own name, in partnership with God. Another, I love the distinction between name and title. The next one is really a technical question. Francie, just type where you typed in your question about, do you have to click on raised hand? We got your question. So that's it for now.
Good. And the comment about the title and the name, I think that we all receive with our name, we receive an open invitation to engage with that name, to explore its meaning, and to also engage with the stories that are embedded in that name. The invitation is open. Doesn't necessarily mean that we have to accept it, as we will see. And now, John, if you don't mind reading to us.
Okay, 1 second. I got to move the question box out of the way. The children pressed against each other inside her. The Eternal One said to her, 2 peoples are in your belly. 2 nations shall branch off from each other as they emerge from your womb. 1 people shall prevail over the other. The elder shall serve the younger. When the time came for her to give birth, lo, she had twins in her belly. The first came out reddish all over, as though covered with a hairy mantle. So they named him Esau. His brother, following, came out holding Esau's heel. So they named him Jacob.
Toda. So this took us back a little bit to how the story started, and the reason why I wanted to do it is because I feel that, you know, sometimes it's not only the name that defines how the journey of an individual will evolve, but also the circumstances that that person was born to. So as we can see from the very beginning, there is a struggle, there is a tension between the 2 brothers that will later be born, and there is, you know, we said before that a name is also a prophecy, and there was a prophecy. These 2 will become 2 separate nations. There is the word separation is very present, and also there is a vision about the nature of the relationship and the power struggle between them. There will be a power struggle. They're struggling inside you already, and also the Rav Ya'avod Tza'ir. Rav could mean that the older one will be dominated, or will work for the younger. But there is clear, I mean, and the commentators are really perplexed by what does it mean, what the separation means. Of course, they attribute many connotations and meanings to this. And the second part is once they emerge, once they appear in the world, we have the first one, Esav, is all red. And the one of the translation of why it was named Esav is the word Esav could also mean in Hebrew asui. Asui from the verb asa, to do. And the idea was that when Esav came out, it was full of hair, it was complete in a way. So one of the translations is that Esav was complete when he came out. That's why he was called Esav. And that also made me ask a question. If Esav is called because he came out complete, what does it say about Jacob? And when we go to Jacob, we see that Jacob is described by his action. Okay, he came out holding Esav's heel. So we have Esav, who we meet by his looks, and his name comes from the way he looks, and we have Jacob that receives his name by his actions. And the actions clearly are a cue to what will happen next. But the interesting thing about the names is also that Yaakov means bent. So there is something about the name, Jacob's name, that is either he's going to follow someone, he's going to be, there's something about either his journey that is going to be bumpy, that is not going to be direct, maybe not sincere. Depends on how you read the meaning of the word Yaakov. But we clearly have here a story where from the beginning we know what stages 2 and 3 are going to look like. The names are once again cues to how these 2 siblings are going to grow and what is going to be the nature of the relationship. And the third thing is that the parents, Yitzhak and Rivka, are receiving a very clear message about what will be the future of these 2 children. And my question to you and to us is, if we have all this information, if Rivka knows from the beginning of her pregnancy that there will be a power struggle between her two sons, what do you think about the names? What do you think about the decision to name Yaakov with all the explanations and interpretations that I shared with you, and Esav? Should I repeat my question?
Sure.
What I'm asking is, we now understand what the names of what the meanings of the names are, and also what is the context to the birth of Jacob and Esav. With the knowledge that Rivka had, we don't really know who gave Jacob his name, but do you think that there might have been a different way of naming him?
Okay, here are a couple questions.
Okay.
Comments. It seems as if Esau doesn't have a chance to grow from the get-go. He comes out complete based on what you said. And one person says it's not a problem with the question, it just takes some time to think about it.
You're right about that.
Here's another one. It may show that they both knew what was to come. Perhaps there wasn't such deception as we're led to believe. Perhaps they knew the future journeys and played out the deception scene full well knowing that this is what was supposed to happen. The name may have been a clue to us. Perhaps it is that Esau is more static and Jacob is more active. I'm just looking to make sure I got everybody. Looks that way.
Well, it's interesting because, I mean, first of all, it's right. The interesting thing about it is that everyone knew, as I said before, from the names, from the prophecy, that there will be a tension. Everyone could have guessed, maybe not everyone, but Rivka and Yitzhak definitely could have guessed, you know, what the journey would look like, and still they went with names that represented the actions. It's true that Jacob will be more active in shaping his own destiny, and that's the interesting thing, that on one hand, or we know that this is what things are going to look like. There's going to be a struggle between the siblings. It's going to be a power struggle, and the younger one will prevail. So if so, why there is a need for Jacob to come out holding Esav's heel? If everything is determined, if he already knows that, you know, that this is the way that things are going to evolve, then why is the need to rush the future on one hand? On the other hand, if we already know what's going to be in the next stage, I might be critical of Rivka here, but I think that the interesting thing is to see that all this knowledge didn't really translate into action in terms of the parents when the struggles began.
There's one last comment.
Yeah.
In terms of looking towards the future and our parasha, Jacob is bent later on when his name is changed to Israel. So the physical change.
Right. Right, and also, I mean, there are few things that Jacob needs to, few lessons that Jacob needs to learn before he will be able to transition into Israel, and we'll address that in a few minutes. But and he will also have to do he will have to learn a few lessons. He will have to do a few actions, and also, you're right, it will be marked not only in his personality but also on his body. But the big question that I identify, at least at this stage, and this will also lead us to the next slide, is the tension between the ability, is a name or name giving something that opens doors to our personal journeys and to our personal growth, or is it something that is limiting, that shapes our journey, that marks, that actually limits our ability to evolve? And here is where I feel that I can't be certain about the fact that the story of Jacob and Esav influenced the Israeli poet Maya Bejerano, but I think that it's very linked, and that's why I want us to move to the next slide. And I will, as I said before, because it's a Hebrew poem and I feel that there is an added value to listen to the Hebrew, I will start by reading the poem in Hebrew, and then John will read it in English. Shem, Maya Bejerano. לכל ילד שמו שם, שלט גדול כמו בגן הבוטני, בגן הזואולוגי. כשנכנסים לחיים צריך שלט, גדר מסמנת של גבולות אני. ובזמן האפל שבין הגיחה לעולם, עד לנעיצת השם על לוח הלב או המצח, ובזמן האפל הזה בוכים לפעמים. מחוסר התאמה ומכאב הלחיצה, כי כל שם הושג על תנועת החופש המקורית האין כבולית.
To each child they gave a name. A big sign like in the botanical garden, in the zoo. When you enter life, you need a sign, a fence defining the borders of the self. And in an ambiguous time between coming out into the world until the bestowing of the name on one's heart or forehead, we cry sometimes during this uncertain time due to misalignment or from painful pressure, because every name is a restriction on the original unfettered freedom of movement.
So the first thing that I want to invite us to do is, once again, we can read the poem, each of us, in the language that we feel more comfortable, and as we do our second reading, try to identify binary opposites that are present in the poem. It's opposition of words, of ideas, and try to see which kind of opposites you identify.
We have one comment, restriction on, and in parentheses, on behavior, question mark, and freedom. The coming out equals our proactive activity versus the bestowing of the name, which is imposed on us. Another person says, my question is, do people, or enough people, have any clue what their names mean to associate behavior, etc., with their names? Coming out into the world versus on one's heart. which is internal to one's being, one's nature. We are passive recipients of our names at birth, but we have the opportunity to make our own, or even to change the name given at birth to better reflect who we think we are or want to be. It strikes me that we are crying during the ambiguous time. We cry until we have the name. The babies cry either from misalignment of our name or from painful pressure of having to leave the security of the womb. Yehudit, I just want to give you a time check. You have about 25 more minutes.
Yeah. So
Got another
if that, yeah.
2 comments just came in while I was saying that.
Sure.
Parents and children shape them by their expectations and also by society's expectations. This imposition is necessary for civilization of little blank slates, but is not ironclad once a person matures, crying before naming. Security of the womb becomes the confinement of the given name. The big nothingness, which may be a continuation of the earlier comment of crying before the naming, and then the obvious contradiction between the original unfettered freedom of movement and the restriction of that name.
Wonderful. So once again, thank you very much for all these interpretations and the comments. And I feel that, you know, there is a clear, very noticeable tension here between that, as you said, the unfettered freedom of movement, as long as people are in the womb, and the moment that we appear into the world, not only the appearance, as we emerge into the world, but the fact that the name represents the expectations. It could represent socialization, it could represent hopes, it could represent the family heritage, everything that we are born into that will shape our personality. And there is the interesting thing is that all these things not only appear on our forehead, that in a way, even though it belongs to us as one of our organs, it's quite external. They penetrate into the heart, and they have a way of marking our inner journey as well as the external journey. The interesting tension in the poem is that it starts, if we go back to how it starts, it sounds like the name is not necessarily something negative, but it could be something that protects us, that helps us to define the boundaries that we grow out of. And boundaries are not necessarily something negative. And the ambiguous time could also be a time of lack of clarity. Who am I? What I want to be? How do I negotiate and mediate between all these expectations and all these circles of belonging? And I think that as we will move now to the next chapter in the life of Jacob, that tension of, you know, what happens from the moment you are born till the moment you meet your name, and then you have to walk with that name. And I agree with the comment, whether you understand the name and whether you don't understand the name, because also, I mean, the fact that many individuals might not really explore what their name means, what it represents, who are the people they were named after, it's still, even if it's implicit, it's still, there is a baggage. And an individual, as he develops his own personality or her personality, interact with that baggage, whether the baggage is explicit and whether they are knowledgeable about the baggage and whether or not. And I think that the poem really holds those two poles. On one hand, you know, there is a protective, necessary element of naming. The second thing is that don't know if ideal or naive belief that the individual starts his journey with an unlimited, unbinded, unfettered movement, freedom of movement. And I think that the beauty of Jacob is that he addressed these two tensions and give his own interpretation. And that leads us to the second part of our portion, where you already mentioned before the transition from Jacob to Israel and what the transition means. But before we read that, I just want us to remember that our portion starts when Jacob is getting ready to return to his homeland. He fled from his brother after he deceived him to get the blessing of his father. He knows now that he's about to meet his brother, and he's very worried about that. He's preparing himself and his family to meet that brother that represent challenging times in his own life. And after he already sent gifts to his brother, after he separated himself from his family, he's left to his own. Jacob stays that overnight, and throughout that night there is a struggle with an entity that is not really clear if it's an angel, if it's a dream. The interpreters themselves are some attribute it to a dream that he might have. Some are saying that the struggle is with the angel of Esav, and they attribute an allegoric meaning to that struggle. Because if we said before that that Rivka has been told that, you know, two separate nations will emerge out of your womb, then the struggle is the struggle between Jacob and Esav, the Edomite, and Jacob representing the people of Israel. And in that moment, when Jacob is left to himself at the end of the struggle that will mark him internally and externally, just like the poem on his forehead and on his heart, just before he's ready to move on, first of all is being asked by the angel, what is your name? And he says it, and he answers Jacob. And then the angel says to him, no more shall you be called Jacob, but Israel, for you have struggled with God and with men, and you have prevailed. So my question to you is, what does it mean? What does it mean that Jacob has struggled with God and with men? And why is that a sign that he's ready to move on to his new name?
Okay.
John, do we have
one. He has progressed in his journey. He is about to risk all for the sake of potential relationship healing and redemption. He reached an elevated point of understanding of what he needs to do. To struggle and prevail indicates attaining a new level of maturity and an ability to accept responsibility. Is Jacob perhaps the first bar mitzvah in quotes?
Well, I think he does, and I think that, there are two. First of all, I want to say that, that he is being told about the name, the transition in his name twice. The first time he's after the struggle with the angel, that the angel says to him, "No more shall you be called Jacob, but Israel," and that doesn't mean yet that the name that Jacob has transitioned into Israel, but it's a prophecy saying that later on, as we will see towards the end of our portion, he's being the transition to Israel now is being given to him by God. It's become official. And the official element is not only that Jacob is now has now matured into Israel, maybe is ready for his bar mitzvah, like you just said, and I agree with that. But it's also about taking us back to the portion of Toldot when Jacob was born, because back then God already said to his parents that is the future of Jacob. Jacob will be, of those two brothers, the one that will carry the legacy of the people of Israel. And yet he had to go through different stations in his life to deceive his brother and to deceive his brother and his father, even though it's not agreed whether he really deceived Esav or Esav gave him was freely giving his blessing. The interesting thing, though, that when Jacob is being deceived by Lavan, he's very upset with him. And unlike his attitude, when Jacob confronts Lavan and when Jacob confronts Esav, the attitudes are very different. And the commentators were very upset with the way that Jacob goes out of his way to please Esav. And they were and they asked themselves, how come Esav represents the Edomite, represents the enemy that Jacob and the Jewish people and the Israelites have already received the blessing of God that they will prevail them. So how come he pleased and he addresses Jacob in Esav, in such an unworthy way? And there are two interesting commentators that say, the first one is by Rabbi Hirsch. He says Jacob knew that he wasn't right in the way that he treated his brother. He knew that he should ask for his forgiveness. His ability to understand that and dealing with the shame and dealing with the regret is what allows him to transition from Jacob, that akum, bent, into something that is straightforward, into something that is mature and responsible and can now carry the prophecy of being the leader of the Israelites. And so that's the first one that really represents that the change represents a change in personality. Even though the name, once again, is given to him by God and not a name that he gave himself, if we go back to the first Midrash Tanchuma, he acquired the name. The fact that he was able to, first of all, he received a lesson from Lavan, because the 7 years that he worked for Lavan and then received Leah instead of Rachel was a similar act to the act that he did to his own brother. So his history already taught him that the things that he does to others might come back to him, and he grew out of it. He was now able to meet with Esav. He was able to struggle with his own inner demons and to be responsible for his actions, to ask for forgiveness. That helps him to grow to the next stage. And the reason why when we were reading the poem by Maya Bejerano, I said that Jacob represents the maybe third interpretation of the poem, is because name doesn't necessarily mean boundary as something negative. Name is also a boundary that allows the individual to grow, to develop his personality, to interact with his tradition, with his siblings, with a calling and a vocation, to accept it. to embrace it in a way, and to earn it. Because the interesting thing is that the word kana, the word acquires, also represents the word mikne, kettle, things that people own. But sometimes you own things because you receive them in inheritance. Sometimes you own things because you really worked hard to get them. And I feel that the name Israel is given to Jacob, when he reaches a moment in his life that is able to fully represent that name and to let go of the name Jacob that represents early stages in his personal journey.
You have two comments here.
Sure.
One is he is no longer just an individual, but now representing a people. And another, at birth he held on the heel, and so he was called Jacob. No more grasping and scheming. That's
Exactly.
it.
That's exactly what the commentators are saying. They're saying that you will no longer have to fight and take in an unjust way what is really yours. From now on, you're receiving the official blessing yourself. You will no longer have to hold someone else's heel to get what was initially yours. And this means two things. First of all, it's not that you're not going to have to fight for the things that you should receive. You can fight, and you will have to fight, but you will do it in the appropriate way, not through deceiving. So that's the first thing, and that's the beauty. Now you really earned the blessing. The second interesting thing about that is that, as you might know, the name doesn't really stick. I mean, Jacob and Israel will reappear in the future in relationship relating to Jacob. So if he matured, and if he really went through this journey, and if he really earned to be called Israel, why is he still sometimes called Jacob? And also, so that's the first thing that maybe I will conclude. And the second thing is that, why did he have to get the name twice? Why was that transition from Jacob to Israel mentioned twice? And the commentator is saying, and I think that is interesting also if we bear in mind the journey, is that until he faced Esav, he didn't really earn his name. That's why the angel, throughout the struggle, at the end of the struggle, says to him, this is what will happen. You will transition into a different name that will represent your ability to struggle in an honorable way with God and with other men. But unless, I mean, it will only happen to you once you've pleased your brother and made peace with him. And that's just what happened. And the second thing that I mentioned, the fact that the name doesn't stick, I think that the Rabbi Joseph Dov Soloveitchik, when he talks on tshuva, on repentance, on tikkun, says that there are two ways of doing tshuva. One means erasing the past and moving into a future with a blank page. And one tshuva is not forgetting about the past, is recognizing the past, is dealing with the challenging moments, with the bad behavior, with the lessons that you take, and carrying those lessons so that they shape your personality. The transition from Jacob to Israel will always represent that struggle, and that's why, even though he now really earned his right to be called Israel, his right to be to represent the people of Israel, he also carries with him that element of Jacob, that element of his past journey and journeys. Because we have a few more minutes, if there are any questions.
You want to go on to one of the next slides?
Sure. I want to conclude with one more poem in Hebrew that will summarize the journey that we went through together through the text, the reading of the text. And I will read it quickly in Hebrew, and then John, you will read it in English, and we'll leave you with that. החיים שיש לך. החיים שיש לך הם החיים שחיית. הבט אחורה בהבנה. מצא את נקודת הבראשית, הבריאה. ברא את עצמך. זה העולם הטוב ביותר, היחיד שתוכל לברוא. כל זה מצוי בתוכך. גלה אותו, התחל מההתחלה. הבט על חייך כעל שיעור רע. על מה שהיה כעל עונש. הרחקה. עמידה בפינה. נוקאוט בסיבוב הראשון. תקן. כאחד שעברי. כאחד שחלה.
The life you have, Yona Walla. The life you have is the life you've lived. Look in retrospect with discernment from the moment of, in the beginning, the creation. Create yourself. This is the best world, the unique one you could create. All this is found within you. Uncover it. Start from the beginning. Look at your life as on a poor lesson at what was as a punishment, distancing, standing in the corner, a knockout during the first round, fitted as one who healed, as one who had been sick.
Thank you. And we will end with this. It's, Yona Volach is telling all of us that there is a possibility, first of all, to look in retrospect with compassion, to find the moment of beginning and to grow out of it. When she says at the end, כאחד שעברי, as one who healed, it's also a play of words with bara, create. So we all have the possibility of learning from the bad lessons and recreating ourselves and maybe embracing the name and our lives and creating them, shaping them, and not only allowing the name to shape us. Thank you very, very much. The last poem is Each Person Has a Name, the original poem that I opened the webinar with, by Zelda.
Do we want to read it or just leave it for everybody to share?
Exactly.
Okay. Give you a second to read it. I'm going to move us along more because our time is running out. Our next Torah, I hope you have enjoyed learning with Yehudit today. I know I enjoyed working with her as she prepared it and got more. I found more insight in today's lesson than in all of our conversations. If you enjoyed studying with Yehudit, Yehudit will be back with us again in January for Torah Live webinar, and that will be posted on the website. But in December, Rabbi Jan Katsu will be teaching on That's Jewish, a look at troubling, perplexing, and surprising texts from our tradition. So I hope you all will join us between now and then. To those of you who are in North America, happy Thanksgiving. In the United States, the Canadians on here have already celebrated Thanksgiving, and Hanukkah Sameach. May your Hanukkah be filled with blessing and joy and, of course, lots of light. And again, thank you for being with us today.